So how do you know how and when to handle something in a way that's going to provide spiritual growth, even if there may be no spiritual growth immediately present in that?
There is a point that you get to where you can handle things or interact from a place of center and spiritual growth. When you're trying to figure it out, it doesn't look like that, right? When you're trying to figure it out, it basically looks like reacting on instinct and then observing your reaction and how it felt and whether it truly represents everything that you are as a person. And then you learn in hindsight that you would handle something differently. So the next time that you're in that kind of situation, your default then is to either pause and then reassess how you would react and then not it's not retraining, it's like reinstigating a more natural true instinct to yourself.
How do you trust that instinct? So let's just be very like let me give you an actual example and let's work through that. And it's not even about me. So one of my friends is dealing with a guy that she really likes that's not interested in being more than casual with her. And she was
Mm-hmm.
coming to me and not necessarily asking for advice, but just talking with me and relating and trying to explain her situation of she's so in love with him, not just romantically, but as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And she's struggling with this dual, like with this dichotomy of, I know that falling back into these old ways of being and going to sleep over at your place and all of this is bad for me. I know that. I've known this for a while. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, I'm so scared that I'm going to make all this spiritual and emotional progress and still fall back into these same habits.
So you can't make this spiritual progress and fall back into the same habits. So if you're still falling back into the same habits, you might be progressing, but you're not progressing in the way that will affect those behaviors. Um, so in her situation, like it's hard because I can't actually don't have enough information to profile either of them and how they're interacting. But she's attached to something that's not healthy for her there, whether it's him, whether it's the idea of having to be in a long-term relationship and commitment being something that she needs to feel safe and why. All of those layers and more are at play there. But whatever she is, if she knows it's not good for her and she's compromising herself, she needs to figure out in what way.
So right now she is attached, and
Mm-hmm.
the immediate answer in modern culture is to detach.
Mm-hmm.
Is this something JB Meyer endorses?
No, because you miss the whole point. So attachment is not love. That they are not the same thing, right? We are taught that they're the same thing, but they're not the same thing. So she is either in love with him or she is attached to him, but she's not both. And so shutting down and detaching doesn't actually address the thing that she's being pulled to figure out. Shutting down and detaching just swallows it and means that she's going to meet another guy that's going to put, or it be in another situation that's going to try and tease out whatever she's trying to figure out.
And when we're talking about the progression, you were saying that she's progressing, but just not in the way that she needs to in order to stop those behaviors. So
To clear them. Mm-hmm.
we can progress spiritually and emotionally, but just in the wrong way.
Not in the wrong way, in a different way, right? So it's like, having a bag of Skittles and being like, I'm eating the bag of Skittles, but you're only eating the blue and green and red ones, right? But the thing that you're actually supposed to be paying attention to is the chocolate and blue ones, but you're not eating those because you're too busy eating all the other cups.
And what does it mean to operate in not in attachment and not in detachment? What is that word? What is that gray area? And how do you operate in that? What does that look like in terms of, let's use her as an example. So she's stuck in this situation, and I understand we don't have enough information right now, but if she were to operate in that gray area between attachment and detachment, what is an example of how she would be able to interact? And it doesn't have to be a guy and a girl, it could be a girl and a guy or whatever, just a human.
The first thing is she'd be more clear about how she's compromising, and she'd be more clear on why that doesn't work for her. And so she has a higher level of communication in that situation to communicate that to the other party and to herself to understand where she is. What she's finding now is that she's clouded by her attachment or her devised idea of love that is providing a friction between her understanding her own clarity and how to communicate that to herself and others, rather than being caught up in the idea of what she's attached to right now or the need that she's trying to feed there.
How does Jamie Meyer deal with something like this? And does Jamie Meyer deal with something like anything like this? You've how long have you been operating in this gray area? You call it neutral, Alex calls it acceptance. Let's just keep it gray area because we've been using that. How long have you been operating
I
in
like
this
gray
gray
area.
area?
In all areas of my life, I don't know. It's definitely a slow understanding of how to apply it. Well, it was for me anyway. It wasn't just like this epiphany that I could function in this gray area and then everything in my life was no longer black or white. It was then discovering what the gray area was in every situation, in every interaction, in every thought process or belief that I had, and what the gray area needs to become. It needs to become a personal definition as well, right? So your gray area doesn't look the same as my gray area in the same circumstances, because what I value sits in that gray area and what you value sits in that gray area. And so they're the same in the sense that they're clear. We both have clarity and we both live in a central place of ourselves, but they're not necessarily defined the same.
And does operating in the gray area allow you to deal with adversity in a much better way?
I believe so,
Why?
because the gray area is not singular. It's multidimensional, it's layered, it's has depth. And so you don't function from a place where this is the only truth, right? And so right and wrong becomes more like understanding of how layers interact and how they all exist and they can all be true simultaneously. And it allows you to interact with a very superficial circumstance in a much deeper sense.
Can the gray area, as it exists in your mind, in your soul, and as I'm learning to understand it, can the gray area exist within modern capitalistic society or modern human society in general?
If I live in the gray area, doesn't it exist?
Sorry, okay, let me rephrase. Can the gray area exist en masse in a modern
Yes,
capitalistic society? How does that work?
absolutely.
So, well, let me just detail the question.
Mhm.
So, Jamie Meyer has lived in the
Why
gray
is this
area.
so much about me?
No, but you are kind of like the pioneer of the gray area in some way, at least
I
for
don't think
internet
so.
culture. Um, but it's very difficult, I guess, to live in the gray area in modern capitalistic society because I'm attached to so many things just from the basis of capitalism. And this isn't to say we're going to switch to communism and it's going to be better. I'm just saying like we can agree that there are things wrong with capitalism and so anyway. But I see skincare and I feel bad. I see models, I feel bad. I see anything. There's always a solution for some problem that I've generated by looking at
Supposed
the
to have,
solution,
even
right?
yet, even if you don't have the problem.
Why does that attachment exist? And did it exist before, or was it generated by capitalistic society? And then layer on to that is how do I operate in the gray area afterwards?
Capitalistic society was not the ignition of that level of functioning. It happened well before capitalism existed. It's just the modern evolution of social application of that same way of being. Because the black and white is, and not the grey, is the way that humans have interacted and society has propagated being human for centuries. It just looks different now than it did in the 18th century or the 16th century. The grey area is a personal thing, right? It's an individual. Society can't give you the gray area. Even if it taught you that the gray area existed, you still have to define and function and choose to function from the gray area yourself. It's not, you can't go to the store and buy it on the shelf and fix all of your problems, right? We can't turn the gray area into a capitalistic thread. So the biggest difference between the question you're asking and then how it exists is the choice between understanding that society doesn't get to dictate how you function as a person and you get to choose that for yourself.
I still don't understand how you get to choose that for yourself because to me, well, obviously I'm being like I understand it because I've worked through it, but to tell
Mm-hmm.
people that they can just one day switch on and switch the gray area on and find themselves in the gray area seems almost oversimplistic.
I would actually consider that they're switching off. So they're switching off the thread that they're on, right? Which is it's like walking into a room and somebody already having the television on and you having to watch what's on the television and then choosing to turn that off. It's like switching channels. And I don't think that you tell people that they have to live in a gray area. I think that people's lives are constructed so that they find it, and whether they do or they don't depends on how they choose to interact with their life. But I also think that it still has to be a personal choice. Like I find benefit in the gray area, and you're learning to discover benefit in the gray area. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to function there. Definitely a better place for humanity to function, but it is ultimately their choice if they wish to.
Gosh, I love these conversations because every single time somebody comes on and they're just like, this sounds like a cult. And it almost is. And it's always great. It's always incredible to just go down that path and be like, yeah, this kind of sounds like a cult. It really does.
There's a difference between telling people they have to be in the gray area and like the cult is telling everybody you have to be in the gray area, right? This is the furthest thing from a cult.
Right, right.
I
Jimmy
have a
Meyer
question though. Is it
practices.
just me? Is it just me that feels like it's a cult, or is it every guest that you have? Because maybe you're the cult leader and not me.
Maybe it's possible. It's possible. Because I'm the one that started saying a cult, so maybe I
You
used
did.
reverse psychology on this. Okay. I'm gonna have to take a look in the mirror on that one. Let's go back a couple of steps because you said that this happened far before modern capitalistic society, centuries before. I think you and I would say millennium before. But what was that specific thing that happened? Something about how humans interacted with themselves and then with the external and with the internal.
Look, I'm not a history buff, so I can't pinpoint the very thing in history that happened. And the thing about history and our natural progression as human society is that we progress so differently in different continents for different reasons and for different survival traits that there wouldn't be one singular nucleus across all of the continents that shifted it. But as soon as we started to, or populations of tribes started to interact in heavier density, a need to control something that was unusual formed, right? And the more people that were in one place, the more safety was considered structure. And we started to cling to ideas of control. And so, as we've tried to control society, we've tried to control one another and we've tried to control ourselves.
And why does that happen and cause us to revolve or devolve into the external, focusing on everything else but ourselves, but the wisdom that we have inside us? Because that is a fundamental feature of modernity, which is,
Mhm.
I mean,
External orientation.
yeah, I've told you this many times. Like, one of the sentences I'm most proud of in the book that I'm working on right now is, powerful technology is dangerous if the wisdom to wield it is not proportional. But we don't have exponential wisdom right now, and it's not looking like we're getting there. That's something you and I are trying to cold start. But why did humanity suddenly stop looking internally or stop finding reason or incentive to look internally as well as externally. Because I can understand if it was both simultaneously, but we stopped doing the internal thing completely.
Yes, but the internal thing did not fit the control dynamic, because the control dynamic was about removing independence or interdependence from people so that they functioned in harmony, which to me, like, that definition of harmony is not actually harmony. But so, for example, like in Rome, the emperors or Caesars would keep the poor people, which was the majority of the population, fed and entertained, which would keep them malleable to whoever was in power, right? So they would be fed enough to feel sated, and they would be taken to the Colosseum to be entertained in whatever capacity. And that was enough to keep them in the order of power and not uprise against the emperor, right? Or the Caesar, depending on what century it was. And that was not the start of that framework, but it is a framework that modern society is very strongly still built on, even though it doesn't look the same.
But I'll challenge you on this. Not that I don't agree on it, but it still doesn't it's still not clear to me why a group of humans was like, okay, well, you guys do that, but we're gonna focus on the internal as well, or instead.
There are, though, like there's monasteries and Buddhist communities, and there are pockets of people that still value that, but they disconnect themselves from the influence of anything else.
But those seem more esoteric than anything else. I've always struggled with this. I don't know why. Maybe again, it's just my upbringing and the blank slate that I was forced to fill with certain facets of civilization. But when I look at the monasteries in Kurukshetra or Kyoto or wherever, it's cool, but I'm not connected in that way. It takes so much to drop away, and maybe I'm making the point for them, but it's like there are only two ways of existing, and the bridge to either is literally just almost one way. It's far easier to go from the internal to the external than it is to go from the external to the internal. That's why the book The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari is so famous, because people are like, "Oh my gosh, real this has legs." But the actual process of doing it, nobody does, because nobody wants to live without the Ferrari. Nobody wants to go and just sit down all day and look at the stars.
Mm.
But again,
No,
we do want
it's
to do that.
it's not that people don't want to live without the Ferrari. People do not want to live without what the Ferrari represents for them. Right? It's not that they don't want to live without the Ferrari. The Ferrari represents something for them, whether it be success, power, um, validation. The Ferrari represents something, right? And they don't want to live without the symbol of what that validates.
I want you to go deeper on that. So I don't necessarily want the Ferrari. I want the symbol of I want what the Ferrari represents. What does the Ferrari represent in this context, and how do we extract abstract that?
Right? So the Ferrari representing the thing that you're looking for is an external orientation. It's how we're taught to communicate our self-worth and value to ourselves and other people, right? Let's say the Ferrari represented integrity. Just let's pick. It's easier to function in the world to get the Ferrari, for the Ferrari